My name is Michael Montague. I am a microbiologist and the CTO of the Quantum Biology Institute. I'm going to talk to you about how I got into quantum biology. When I first became involved in quantum biology, I was contracted by Leverage Research to do a threat model on quantum biology, the emerging field. A threat model is a model of whether or not something could be a threat under conceivably any circumstances. So a threat model of a knife would acknowledge that it could be used as a weapon, it could be used for legitimate purposes but then lead to an accident. It could include the fact that, never mind the fact that it's sharp, it's big and heavy and possibly could just fall on someone's foot and break a bone. It would include all the threats that the knife would represent. The reason you want the threat model of things is because you don't always have the answer to the question, how is something a threat? The most prominent reason you don't have the answer is because it's new. So in the case of an emerging scientific field like quantum biology, a threat model represents the question, how will this change how we understand and use the things we already have? How will it have new properties that are different from the properties of things we do have? And are those properties or those change behaviors dangerous? Can you be harmed by it? If you can be harmed, would it be harmed accidentally or deliberately? So a threat model would cover all of that. And of course, the truth is that when you look at threats, anything is dangerous under the right or depending wrong circumstances. So the real question then becomes, what are the circumstances that make it dangerous? And does that become a compelling threat relative to the dangers that beset us on all sides from everything? That's the question of threat modeling. And so people who are trying to research a new field should perform a threat model, especially if it's a radical new field that's completely outside the realm of anything you've ever considered before, like say quantum biology, because it's radical new territory. It might be a radical new threat. And you should at least have some idea of whether or not that's the case. That's a good thing to know first, if you can know it. And of course you can't know it with certainty, but you can make a better than educated guess. And the reason you can make a better than educated guess is because we have a lot of experience about how threats have developed historically, and that can in turn inform what kinds of threats might develop from a new thing if you know even some of its properties. The people at Leverage Research wanted to know, is quantum biology a Pandora's box? Is it something that in 15, 20, 30 years down the road, we will all be saying, we would just fine if those people at the Quantum Biology Institute had just left well enough alone? Certainly there were people like that who said such things about, say, the Manhattan Project. So nuclear proliferation happened because people didn't realize initially that once that genie was out of the bottle, it might not be fully controllable anymore. Myself and my collaborator, Andrew Sandberg, gave it a real serious analysis. And our conclusions were that, of course you can make it dangerous. You can make it dangerous like you can make anything dangerous. But it wasn't compellingly dangerous. It wasn't dramatically more dangerous than many other things already are. And the reason for that has to do with parameters intrinsic to the nature of quantum biology. Quantum biology necessarily has to involve quantum mechanical effects, which involve fleeting effects that last nanoseconds, and tiny effects that involve a bare few particles. But threats, as humans understand them, involve large effects, involving millions of cells, whole organisms, ecosystems, and long time scales. Years, months, not nanoseconds. We realized, and this is an interesting thing about life, because life isn't unique in this regard, but it is special. Life contains a lot of what we call scale-shifting effects. Effects that start with just a very small number of particles or cells, and then become things that affect large numbers of particles or cells. Consider a mutation. A mutation could start with cosmic ray, one particle at high velocity that strikes a DNA molecule. One molecule that leads to a mutation that alters the behavior of the cell, and then all of its daughter cells. It's inherited. Now, what was a fleeting event that lasted a mere nanosecond is lasting the life of all of the descendant cells of that first mutated cell. If that mutation leads to cancer, then that creates a change in whole tissues, ultimately the life and death of the organism as a whole, which started with one particle. If that is the very rare case of a cancer, like say the facial tumors of Tasmanian devils, then it could even be contagious outside of just one organism to many organisms. If that leads to a transition across the alley effect that leads to a destabilization of a population to the destabilization of a species, you might see the extinction of a species, as has been threatened with the Tasmanian devil facial tumor disease, from what started as one local event with one molecule. If that species is a keystone species, then you might see a destabilization of an ecosystem hinging on the fate of just one molecule. That's a scale shifting effect. Because scale shifting effects, and I've listed quite a few in that hypothetical example, are so prevalent in life, there was the potential that quantum biology could, as a field, as a class of phenomenon, piggyback a threat from a very small event to a very big event. And so we looked at that. We realized that any threat from quantum biology, any threat of quantum biology would have to fall into that category. And we determined that there were quite a few effects of that category. But then we looked at the nature of the ways in which one would try to manipulate such events. Right? And the kind of quantum biology that we were tasked to analyze involves magnetoreception, magnetosensing. Here's the thing, every single one of us, all the time, is carrying around a supercomputer with a whole series of electromagnetic antennae coupled with signal processing capability all the time. And that means any attack signal, any signal that might try to trigger a dangerous scale shifting effect, would be immediately detectable by the victim. Which means, yeah, it might be a dangerous zero-day exploit until people know that it's going on. And then one software update and the whole world is immunized against it. And that's why quantum biology does not represent a compelling threat. But this is a useful thing to look at, okay? Because this is something that every DAO, every DeSci project should be doing. By definition, decentralized science is about taking the gatekeepers out of science. That's what it's for. Now, those gatekeepers do have, we hate to admit it, a legitimate function. That function is to make sure that dangerous things aren't done. And if we're going to take the gatekeepers out of science, then we have to take on that function too. It is incumbent upon us. It is our responsibility to do that. What's more, not only is it our responsibility to do that for the sake of preventing harm, which ought to be a good enough reason in and of itself, it's our responsibility to do that because the people, the gatekeepers that we are disenfranchising, are going to be very quick to point out, hey, these people aren't being regulated, they aren't being controlled, they're dangerous, so we have to be able to point to why we're not. We have to say, see, no, we did our due diligence. We did a threat model. We did a threat model by professionals who know how to threat model correctly, right? We then have the documentation and the reporting to show it. In doing that, we are encouraging the DeSci world to be actually very healthy, even though it might seem like we're actually criticizing ourselves. We're criticizing ourselves, but in a productive